PTSD?
Absolutely. I mean, when I was in the ER after my suicide attempt, I'm here on this little island. I had to be airlifted because I was on an island in the middle of New Zealand. So I had to be airlifted to this ER, and the medical staff that came through watching me were asking me these questions that crack me up to this day. Do you see things or hear things other people don't see? I've just killed myself, right? Meanwhile, my birth guide's sitting on the end of my cot. I've got dead people floating over me because now all of a sudden all of my senses are awakened. If I look at anything, I become it. So I was like going into the walls and out of the walls and in the walls. And I'm like, where am I supposed to be? I'm ping-ponging in and out of this body. So it started literally real time for me. But I didn't have the physical stuff that they had. But nobody cared about my mental stuff. I just killed myself.
Yeah, one of the leading researchers in the field for 50 years is Bruce Grayson at University of Virginia. And he developed the Grayson scale to evaluate NDEs. You know, most people talk about a spiritual journey. They often describe some kind of a tunnel experience. They often meet divine beings, often deceased loved ones. Many describe what they call a life review. And he actually categorized these things with the Grayson scale. And he learned the value of asking a very simple open-ended question without judgment is, did you have any experiences while you were unconscious?
That's good.
And it's a very safe, inviting way to let somebody talk about what they're ready to talk about.
Yeah, because I'm hearing these people that no one else can see, and they're telling me, don't tell them what's happening because they'll lock you up right now. Right. And in that moment, after having taken all these drugs and alcohol, I'm thinking I've damaged my brain. But I have to trust this spiritual tribe that's around me that I'm not familiar with. And it felt more trustworthy to me than any of this 3D stuff did. So I don't know why, but I was just like, no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm so happy. I wanted to run through the hospitals and just tell everyone how euphoric and beautiful life was, and yet I knew I couldn't do that because they would lock me up and think that I'd damaged my brain, and I was still wondering if I'd damaged my brain. So that my transition started there, and it didn't get easier, and it's still to this day there's subtle shifts that are happening and old debris and residue falling away, making space. We were just talking about this. Each bit of story and belief and residue that falls away creates space for this new version of Kelly that's coming into it, lifting up to God. But it was not easy. I lost my partner of 5 years. He and I didn't even know each other anymore. I couldn't relate to him.
That happens a lot.
Yeah,
in the near-death
walls
community.
of Post-its of everything I was experiencing, and he was fascinated. He's like, if everything she was putting on the wall didn't make sense, I would think she's lost her mind, but it slowly started to form, like you, as your physical healing started to form and make some sense. My depression and anxiety and all the stuff that caused me to kill myself was starting to make sense. But no doctor cared about that.
I had a very personal, intimate, long-term experience with helping to reintegrate with Jeff Olson. We started having lunch together almost immediately after he got out of the hospital, and we rarely talked about anything to do with his physical healing. I never knew how much pain he was in for years because he never talked about it. We talked about spiritual things. We talked about, wait a minute, this is what I've been taught all my life, but this is what I experienced when I was dead. And how do you reconcile these things, and where do you give preference to what you embrace and become a part of?
Well, and that brings up something that I think we need to cover, which is religion, because a lot of people who are extremely religious disavow this experience because it doesn't fit in their paradigm. But you guys all articulate it so beautifully in prose that's not necessarily in the Bible, but there's a lot of prose in the Bible that's very accurate, right? I mean, the Bible talks about sovereignty and dominion, that you have sovereignty and dominion unless you don't exercise it, right? So I can't be cause for Dr. Jeff unless Dr. Jeff allows me to be cause for Dr. Jeff. But so a lot of these tenets that are espoused by religion. And in your experience, particularly, Ellen, when you saw Buddha and Jesus, I wanted to ask you all, do you think that the archetypes that we're raised with religiously represent themselves as deity to help the transition because that's what we're accustomed to? Because if you're an Aborigine, you don't know Jesus or Buddha, right? You see whatever the Aboriginal depiction of what was deity in their tribe.
I feel that that being didn't care what I called him. He didn't care. And I was asked when I was interviewed on the NBC Today show, well, did you look to see what he looked like, or him or her or whatever it was? And I said, no, I knew who it was. In your heart, you feel this connection that no matter what religion you were raised in, that connection makes you feel as though that being is someone who's eternal, loving, absolutely accepting. And to me, I think that he wouldn't care or she wouldn't care what I called them. So I actually prefer now to call them the divine.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's an indigenous phrase that says that which is known by 1,000 names and yet remains nameless.
Yes.
And it's, it is, the universe is so kind, it communicates with us, and the language will understand,
Yes,
the language will
exactly.
comprehend. And if that's Jesus and Buddha, that's what you could embrace.
But I didn't know who Buddha was.
Well, there you go.
That's
You were
the thing,
12,
like,
yeah.
I had no idea that was, but
He
it
was
is.
planting himself in your
He was
life for the future.
For the future,
And-
future.
But
yeah.
I do know the light. And in that golden light, there was no name. There was no one way. There was no judgment about how one way was right or the other. And I have to remember that one of the biggest lessons for me is that this is my experience and what I went through. And everything that I see comes through a human interpretation. And through religion, that is a human interpretation of God, of source, of divine, of the I am, right? Because I believe that we are not separate from that energy. And so to label it outside of ourselves, right? That is our human mind trying to conceptualize, trying to understand. But again, the human mind can be a distraction from our purpose, which is to be that divine energy in our human form, seeing out of our eyes, feeling with our body, listening, hearing through source, as if source is living through us. And so this human concept, every single document that we read has a human mind that put it into place, even if it was channeled through some light ray or light, right? And so to know thyself, to know our own divine right and consciousness, and to realize that we can co-create, we can change the world through living in our own light, that we don't have to take on the issues of the world, the constructs. We go through our own journey, we choose our own journey to expand our light. And that is, to me, like the biggest part of this. That
It's so cool, and it's taught. I mean, it's taught. You take a figure like Jesus, and many of the Christian world say, well, he's the light of the world. But he says, no, you're the light of the world.
His lesson
yeah.
that we all have
You are
that.
divine. Walk on the water, Peter. Why
Yes,
do you doubt?
you can do
You know,
this.
greater things will you do. I mean, and you could take all the masters, but really to embrace our own divinity and to shine our unique light. It's
Yes.
like in the universe, one verse, in the one song. And I love, I mean, was it Einstein that said frequency will be the
Yes,
healing
and
of
it
the...
is.
It is, frequencies. So in that one verse, that one song that is all of it, we have a unique tone, we have a unique vibration,
Yes.
a unique frequency that's incomplete without all of us. We all have our contribution to give to the greater whole.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be something big.
No.
It might be the little things that are the big things, and that's what makes the puzzle.
And that's what the life review is at the end, when you get to see all those things that you did.
One of the things that really helped me understand that was I walked into a patient room one day. I think it was in November in Utah. So it was cold and snowy and wet out. And there was a homeless gentleman on the table on the gurney, and he was disheveled, had long, unkempt hair and a big beard, and he struggled with substance use, and he had holes in his shoes and in his socks. I could see his feet through his shoes, and his feet were in rough shape because he'd been out walking around in the cold, wet snow and stuff for a long time. And we hardly spoke. Rather, I went over to the sink and I filled a wash basin with some tepid water and squirted some liquid soap in it, and I sat down at the foot of the gurney with a wash rag and this soapy water, and I took his shoes off, and I removed the last threads of his socks, and I proceeded to wash his feet. And something profound happened in that everything that was physical or mortal or temporal was drawn aside, and I saw who he was. And I knew I was in the presence of God. I thought I was going in there to serve him, and then I realized he was ministering to me. He was the antithesis of everything the world defines as success, and yet he was the divine. And I viewed every soul in my life differently since that day, because I finally realized that's always who you're sitting next to, whether you're in the gutter or in the pews in a church. The person next to you is God. And what he taught me was, that's who you are as well.
Yes.
And when we can come to see one another that way and recognize who we are and who every other soul around us is, then we can come closer to the way we are meant to be.
I think it's important, though, because you touched on this a little bit, and I think it's important for people who are watching this to also know that we're each sharing these little beautiful nuggets, right? But we have pain in between these nuggets, too, because in between each of these beautiful awakenings, which are continuous, we're also having deaths, right? So with each birth, there's a death.
Ego death, so the death of career, family health,
Relationships.
of physical,
The things we've
that we
grown
lose.
above, and our vibrations are changing our environment constantly. So people will say things, I'm sure you guys hear it, I hear it all the time, like, you're so lucky. And I said, no, I'm strong. Because this is not a path that is easy. And we may make it look that way, and I don't want our viewers in this work that we're doing here to lose sight that there is an earnestness for each person in each chair, including that doctor right there who is equally powerfully having the same experience as we are with his willingness and open heart. But there is a lot of pain here too. I mean, you talk about committing to coming back to this life and leaving that marriage. You talk about coming back to this life and leaving half of your life behind. You talk about coming back with 12 years gone. You talk about people that are on your gurneys that you learned from and you also lose in those rooms, right? Some that don't make it.
One of the things that really hits home for me was, as in our current state, we tend to view birth and death as separate things. But in reality, they are the same thing. They are two sides of the same coin. And when we experience birth, we see souls that are reunited, that are joining one another, that are rejoicing, that are thrilled. We don't see the souls on the other side of a veil, if you will, who are grieving and in tears and comforting one another, saying, it's okay, it's the right path, we'll be together again. And you take that scenario and you flip it 180 degrees at the end of life. Now we're seeing the grief, and we're not seeing the people rejoicing beyond reunited again and coming together. So birth and death are actually the same thing viewed from an opposite perspective. And we tend to think that birth comes first, but it doesn't. Death is always first. You always have to die before you can be reborn.
Yes.
Well, and you have a great metaphor peeking behind the curtain that you told us earlier in another taping, where you said the glimpse beyond the veil is the peeking behind the curtain and say, huh.
Yeah, I think of it as if you're in a room that's kind of dimly lit, you can see, it's not bright, but you can see what's going on. And on one side, there's this heavy curtain, and beyond that is this brilliant, beautiful, bright, loving light. And on this side, there's another curtain, and the same thing beyond that curtain. And every once in a while, somebody will draw this curtain back, and a new person will enter the room. That's birth. Yeah. And every once in a while, this curtain gets drawn back, and somebody leaves the room, and that's death. And if you're in proximity when that veil's drawn back, you might get to peer through for a bit. You might even see somebody you know on the other side before it slams shut. And that's kind of how I think about our current existence and where we came from and where we're going.